Hi, my name is Mike Dillard, and this is Self-Made Man, the podcast for men who want to leave their mark on the world and create a legacy of honor, integrity, and achievement in every aspect of their lives. I'm glad you're here, and once again, it is time to forge your destiny. The disruption and decentralization of large established industries is arguably the biggest business innovation that we've seen in the last 10 years. And we have Uber, which has transformed transportation, Airbnb, which has transformed the hotel industry, 99 Designs and ODesk, which have revolutionized outsourcing, and Kickstarter, which has connected business startups directly to their future customers. Well, today we have the amazing opportunity to sit down with a young entrepreneur who's managed to quietly revolutionize the stock photo and film industry over the past 10 years. Joel Holland is the founder of Videoblocks.com, which took everything about the stock photo and video world that sucked and changed it forever. So today you're going to learn how he did it from start to finish, from how he came up with the idea to building the first website to hiring his executive team years later. We're going to dive into what technology and services that they use and even how they split test their pricing. And the best part is that Joel now runs his $30 million a year business from an RV after he and his wife decided to travel around the country full time. So this episode is absolutely filled with words of wisdom that you can apply to your life and your business today. So please help me welcome Joel Holland. So today we are going to be talking with a young entrepreneur who's building one of the fastest growing companies here in the United States, Mr. Joel Holland from Videoblocks. Joel, welcome.
Mike, thanks for having me.
Absolutely.
I'm pumped to chat all things business and entrepreneurship.
Yeah, well, you've got a fantastic story. And, you know, as I've been getting to know you and the company Videoblocks, it really sticks out to me as one of those businesses and business models and ideas that's decentralizing and democratizing, the world of video production and stock footage in a really big way. But if you could, give us a 60-second overview of what Videoblocks is, and then let's dive into what inspired you to start this business.
Yeah, absolutely. So, the simplest way to describe it is, when your viewers are watching a television show or a commercial advertisement, and you see those lead-in shots, the beauty shots, right? Like an aerial shot of the Hollywood sign or a skyline shot in New York City with the sun coming up and, a sunset somewhere over the plains. Typically, those are stock video shots. And viewers don't, they don't know it. They wouldn't know any better. But a lot of the beauty shots that are in television shows and different video productions are actually downloaded from websites like Videoblocks, where we have a library of millions of video clips from all over the world. And so it kind of enables the video editor to do is focus on their narrative and on their production. And when they need just that right, shot or effect or explosion or transition or music, basically all the elements to spruce up the video, they go to our website and download and pop it right in. And so we're very much a behind the scenes company, which is great, and we love it that way. And meanwhile, the whole video production industry is kind of on fire right now. And rewind a number of years, it was all high-end production companies. When you look at today's landscape, it is people like you and I, right? It's YouTubers, bloggers, vloggers, passionate individuals who just enjoy creating and sharing content. And that's really that's kind of our core audience. And you mentioned it in the intro, but our goal with Videoblocks was to democratize the video production landscape, because I found it frustrating when I was a independent video maker. I couldn't afford to buy helicopter shots, right? Like I wanted those cool flyovers that you see in TV shows, and those were so far out of my budget, it was unbelievable. And so we felt like there should be a company that goes and shoots those things and then sells them at such a high volume that we can make the price something affordable to the everyman. And that's what we've done.
So, I'm really curious where that's a great idea, and you have this idea, but where do you start from a practical standpoint where you're like, okay, I think there's a use and a need for this? That's a really big undertaking from just a technology perspective. You were a fairly young man when you started this. How old were you when you started this business?
At the very beginning stages of the company, I was in high school. And so I was probably 16, 17 years old when I was working on this project where we would actually interview interesting individuals and celebrities and politicians on camera and have them share advice for teenagers. And it was during that project that I became frustrated with the inability to afford, the really cool B-roll and effects. And you're right. Like when you step back now and look at the company and all the pieces and all the moving parts, it does seem super complex. But what I think is kind of cool is that, we did it one step at a time. And so at no point was it ever that overwhelming, honestly. It was kind of like one day I had a problem and I said, hey, if I've got this problem, I think there are going to be a lot of other video creators like me who are going to have the same problem. Why don't I try to solve it and see if I can make some money in the process? And the next logical step was, well, let me go buy a camera and buy some equipment and start shooting what I would actually want to be buying and then see if I can sell it. Just that simple. And so that was the very beginning of the company. I took a year off between high school and college. I bought some camera equipment, started shooting in my backyard here in DC. Put that on eBay. I was saying, I knew there were already buyers there, and so I said, hey, if it can sell on eBay, then there must be a market. And it did. It started selling, and so I took the money from those sales, started buying plane tickets and flying all over the country, hitting the different big cities, right? LA, New York, Boston, Las Vegas, and continuing that process of shooting, selling, which was both validating the concept, but also banking some nice revenue that I could then use to keep building the business to the next step. So, you fast forward to today, and you will do close to $30 million in revenue this year, and 80 to 100 employees, and it's a great business. But it really wasn't an overnight success, and it wasn't an overnight thing. It was just one piece at a time. And I think a lot of businesses can be built that way, which is cool.
So, gosh, there's so many questions going through my head right now. When you were selling those clips on eBay, just to give people some context, what would those run from a cost perspective? What would you charge?
Yeah, it was very inexpensive. So my goal from the very beginning was, let's make this stock video as cheap as possible so that the maximum number of people can afford it. And if I can get enough buyers, even at a low price, I can make a profit. And I think my price point at first was like $35. And it wasn't for a clip. It was for an actual tape, because this was 2003. And so I would do a whole city. So you basically buy a mini DV tape with 60 minutes of shots of every landmark, different time of day, sometimes different seasons of a city. And I started putting that on eBay, and there was no stock video market at this time. I mean, this was really kind of the beginning. CNN Image Source had, you could try to buy stuff from their libraries and archives, but this was the beginning of this industry. So I didn't even know what to call it. And I used eBay as a good testing mechanism, would launch multiple auctions for the same thing with different titles. Some of them I called B-roll, some of them I called stock footage, some I called stock video. And that was kind of how I started nuancing the price point and the call to action, the name of the product, and all that good stuff.
So when you decided to turn this into a bigger business, right? When you decided to create, if you will, this portal or community for other producers to sell their content on, did you undertake that endeavor on your own? Did you have a mentor or business partner help you with that? How did you even start the tech of it and the website development?
Yep. It's a great question. And so it was a lot of natural evolutions. And so it went from selling on eBay to building the first website, footagefirm.com. And that was the name of the company way back in the day. And I had enough programming knowledge, basic HTML, and some database knowledge to build the first website. And so I built our site and went to college, went up to Babson College. And while I was at school, I was actually running, the company. I was shooting the footage. I was selling it through the website, managing all the orders and everything. And it was kind of, it was a fledgling business through college, but paid the bills, paid for tuition. And after graduating, and a side story, but I graduated in the worst economy, right, in 2008. and decided to make a run at starting the business anyway. And so I moved back home into my parents' basement and started building the company from the ground up. And so, the first year out in 2009, it was still just me. And we got, I got the company, I suppose, to our first $1 million in revenue. And that was really, really exciting and very, very validating. And at that point, I realized, okay, this could be something very, very large. This could be a real big business. And then the question was, well, could I do this on my own? I don't think so, right? I think a lot of young entrepreneurs become a little bit arrogant and think that they've achieved some moderate success, therefore they could scale to the moon. And there are the Mark Zuckerbergs and individuals like that who can, but I didn't think I was one of those. And so I actually started to look around at finding a partner. And the way I approached it was to look at raising funding. And so I kind of went out and looked at different venture capital options, and we were luckily, the company is growing very quickly and we're very profitable, and we're fortunate to be able to have our pick of some pretty good funding sources. And so in 2011, I started this fundraise process. 2012, closed a Series A, $10.5 million. And that provided, in addition to the money, it provided this legitimacy for the company that helped with recruiting. It helped with strategy. Right now, all of a sudden, we had everyone at UpData and Acuity Investors, the two firms. They could give us insight, on landmines they'd seen other entrepreneurs hit, growth goals we should be thinking about. So that to your question about partners, that was how I approached partners. And you fast forward 4 years to today, and I think it was definitely the right move, because going it alone, I don't think the business would be where it is today.
Interesting. That's a topic that we've discussed here multiple times, because that's a question that I am playing around in my head with my next business that is getting ready to launch, on whether or not I should bring on investors. And the conclusion that I've come to is very similar, which is that money is money. For the right business is really everywhere, and what really matters most is the brain share that you get along with it. So being very conscious about who you accept money from and what they bring in addition to the capital is really what's important, I think.
Absolutely. And in fact, I was given some good advice during this fundraise process. Someone said, a funding partner is like a husband or wife you can't divorce. So they said, think very carefully about who you get into bed with, because basically not all money is the same color of green, and you're going to have ups and you're going to have downs in every business. And so you want to make sure you have a partner, and even specifically the individual at the firm that you really get along with well and mesh with, because it's not always going to be rainbows and butterflies.
What are some of the biggest challenges that you've had to go through?
Well, look, I think that growth is always a challenge, especially when you're in the technology world and you're in a high growth business. The expectation of continued high growth is always there, and valuations on tech companies, the multiples right now are very high. But part of the reason they're so high is that companies are expecting to grow so fast, and it's a very basic principle. If you take a piece of paper and fold it in half, that's easy. Fold it in half again, that's still pretty easy. Do it again, it starts getting more difficult. And after a couple more, half turns, it becomes impossible. And so doubling year over year, which is what we were doing for years, and something you want to do forever, but you can't. So I think that's always the challenge, is you want to keep growing, but growth gets harder and harder the bigger you get.
Yeah, absolutely. So one of the most interesting pieces to your business and your lifestyle right now is the fact that you've been leading this company, from an RV for a while now. So how has that worked out, and what inspired you to hit the road?
Yeah. So, about 2 years ago, I started getting a little restless, and I just basically wanted to change it up. And I really enjoy being on the move. I like being outside. I like motion, all these things that kind of keep me energized. and I was spending too much time in the office, sitting at a desk, and kind of approaching burnout, to be honest. And I thought, hey, there's two things can happen here. I can stay in this current cycle where I go to work every day, go fight traffic, come home, get closer and closer to burnout and total disaster, or I can try something different and try to see if I can get out there on the road and try to lead the company remotely. And there was obviously risk there as well, because being an absentee leader is never a positive thing, and that there could be repercussions. But I decided ultimately that burnout was a much higher likelihood than problems trying to run the company remotely. And so the next thing was, well, what do I want to do? And I think our country is really amazing, and I realized I hadn't seen a lot of it. That I'd been spending most of my time on all the coastal regions, right? Like all the big cities on both sides of the country, very little time in the middle. And I wanted to see what was there. So bought an RV and hit the road. And so fast forward to today, and I've now hit traveled 30,000 miles and seen 35 of our states. And hopefully in the next, over the next month, I'll pick up a few more. But it's been great. And it really wasn't, that it was the right move, right? It was the right move to do it.
Well, let's talk about what that conversation looked like with your team, right? Like, Hey guys, got something to tell you. What do your daily responsibilities look like? Since you hit the road, what does your day look like from a work perspective, and how did that conversation go when you had it with the team?
Yeah, it's a great question. And so I was kind of fearful of how it would go and how it would look. So like most things, I kind of baby stepped into it at first. And so got the RV, would take a 1 week trip, come back home, wait a while, take another trip, come back home, wait a while, sometimes take weekend trips. And then, that was kind of stress testing it, and it was fine. I was able to take my calls from the road. We use Slack for communication. That's easy. Email, everything. I mean, the nice thing today, we're so connected everywhere you go that very rarely am I completely out of touch. And so I've got Verizon and AT&T service anywhere I go, so I'm always available. And those shorter trips just started turning into longer trips, and I realized this is working just fine. And I would we do at our company, we do these 360 reviews annually, as well as shorter term reviews as well. But we do this 360 review, and I looked closely to make sure that the feedback wasn't negative, that I was disappearing, and it wasn't. So that was wonderful. Now, as a year got on, and then the second year started getting on, I realized, man, I really like being out on the go, and I've been running this company for 10 years, and I'm ready to change my life up a bit. And so then it became a broader conversation that I had with my investors and one of my, my chief marketing officer to say, hey, if you guys are open to this, I would like to look at over the next year transitioning to chairman and elevating TJ to CEO. Because one of the things that naturally happened, which was awesome, while I was on the road, I knew someone was going to step up in the office day to day to kind of be the team leader. And it turned out it was my chief marketing officer, TJ.
Can't think of a better person to step up, right, than the rainmaker.
Totally. I mean, totally. And just he's an amazing guy, super talented, super sharp, and one of the best managers I've ever met. And so it was just really wonderful that while it was kind of like it was the perfect try before you buy period. I'm out on the road, and I started being less and less in touch, and nothing fell apart because TJ picked up the baton. And so, after a year of that, I had this conversation with the investors and TJ, and everyone was on board with making the official transition. And so earlier this year, we made the official transition where I went to executive chairman and TJ became CEO. And it's been wonderful because now I can spend my time traveling, but also thinking more, strategically about the company, right? So make a lot of my time now, to your question, is spent on business development and strategic partnerships. So it's trying to figure out how we can talk and work with a company like Adobe. And, there's all these natural tie-ins. So trying to get to know the team there, build relationships so that one day when it's time to either sell the business or do some sort of interesting partnership, we've got some great relationships. And so that's been wonderful. And that sort of relationship building can be done from the road. So it's been natural.
How did you find your current exec team? Are these individuals that you knew of maybe from afar in their previous companies and you sought out, or did they randomly show up, as a resume through the website?
No, it's a great question, because hiring, I think, was one of the things that gave me the most, it scared the shit out of me. At the very beginning, I was like, man, I'm 22 years old out of college. I know nothing about management. Who am I to start hiring people that are probably going to be older than I am and telling them what to do and having them rely on me, their livelihoods, their families' livelihoods? It really scared me. And so that, the first few hires at the beginning they were all young. They were young people right out of college, because I understood them and I felt like I got this. But as we then kind of grew a bit, I realized, well, I need to bring on some seasoned management as well, because there are a lot of things that I don't know, and I need someone who's been there before. And so, fortunately, this is where the partnership with our funding companies came in well. They helped. Our first, we hired a chief operating officer 4 years ago, and that was actually an introduction from QED Investors. And it was someone that they had worked with at a number of their portfolio companies. He happened to be available, and they said, "Hey, Joel, if you're interested, this guy might be perfect." And it turns out he was. Then, he ended up bringing in, once he came on board, he brought on our dev lead. He brought on our head of analytics. So he brought on some really powerful people that he had worked with in past lives. And then for our CFO, that was again, it was kind of I think our funding companies and even the law firm we use. The nice thing about being in a city like DC is it's relatively small. And so when we're looking for something like a CFO, there are only so many candidates and everyone knows them. And so it was kind of like who's available, who's good, who would be the perfect fit. And that worked well. Now with TJ, the CMO, that was a bit different. That was just a little more luck, to be honest. We had been using AngelList as a recruiting tool. And what I found was in DC, the people who got on AngelList and put their resumes up, put their hands up for a job, tended to be the most progressive, tech forward individuals. It was not yet saturated like LinkedIn or Craigslist or these others. And so I happened to be browsing AngelList and found this guy who was from Boston, who just moved a day earlier from Boston with his family, who had been a chief marketing officer for 2 different subscription-based companies up there. And I was like, this guy looks great. Let me have a chat. And we hit it off. So that one was definitely, there's always a bit of luck involved, and that was a bit of luck.
Very cool. Yeah, it's always interesting to me on how teams come together, because it can be just very organic and happenstance in many ways, and it's just, I find that fascinating. On you never know who's going to show up and be a part of your vision and take it to the next level. So, what were some of your, we touched on it for just a second when you were very young, 22. Kind of your insecurities when it came to your age. And I can completely relate to that, because I was attempting to build my first business, at that stage in my life as well. And I was like, why are these adults ever going to listen to me? So, I can totally relate to that. As you've grown older, well, let's just take it to today. What doubts or insecurities do you have about yourself or your growth at this point in your career?
Right now, I'm in a good place. Right now, I'm actually pretty comfortable and confident, because the major pieces are in place. We've got a good industry. We've got great tailwinds of growth in the industry. I think we have an outstanding team. And I think that's probably the reason I'm most confident, is that the people at the helm are just so good that I don't worry. Now, you always worry about where's tomorrow's growth going to come from? What are what's the competition going to do? Is the economy going to fall apart again? What will the ramifications there be? Is our cash burn too high? So there's always plenty to worry about. But when I rewind a few years back, I was in a much more crippling fear state, which was what I came to learn is called imposter's dilemma, imposter syndrome, where CEOs and a lot of all ages, but especially young CEOs, kind of hit this point where they start to wonder if they got to where they are by sheer luck, and that if it was basically a total, like, the stars came together, but they don't belong there, right? And it's imposter syndrome was actually first identified in doctors. They found that doctors who had been doing their profession for years would one day wake up and have no confidence. They would think, I shouldn't be here. I'm an imposter. I tricked my way through school. I don't know what I'm doing. And they would then have them do all these tests to show, look, you actually do know what you're doing. This is all in your head. But it turns out that kind of, that mental craziness hits everybody at some point. And so that hit me a few years ago, and it was tough because then, at that point you're thinking, I'm in way over my head. And that was really what, I don't know if that was what was triggering burnout or if that was a byproduct of burnout, but that was where the storm of I need to change something was starting. And so for me, that was where getting out of the office and getting on the road back to like being, in my element a little more helped.
That's super valuable to hear. Do you have a vision? It sounds like you've hit an inflection point where you've now got time and space to think about the future. Do you have a vision that is at really the next level for you and that might even scare you a little bit?
Yeah, it's a great question. I think when I look at the whole content creation world, it's just growing so fast and it's touching everybody, right? I mean, I just read the numbers on Snapchat, the number of video snaps that are being created today. And when you combine that with Instagram, photos that are being taken and shared a day, it's astounding how many people are creating how much content. And the reality is a percentage of all these content creators want to step their game up, right? Like they start as an enthusiast. The next thing you know, they're like, I love this so much. I want to make a profession out of this. How can I get more, how can I be more professional at it? And that's where we have potential customers. And so what we're basically seeing is the world of potential stock video or production music or stock photo customers, which we serve all of them. That world is growing a lot. It's very quickly. And so I guess that on one hand, we could be up against a company like Adobe or Shutterstock fighting for a piece of a multi-billion-dollar industry. That will not be an easy fight. So the question is, do we shoot for the stars and try to go up against these guys, or do we build a wonderful business and partner or sell to one of these guys? And so that's the question, and there's no perfect answer to it. It's something that we're constantly discussing as a management team and as a board, and the landscape kind of keeps changing, every quarter.
If you sold the company and you could never get back into stock footage again, what would you do?
That's an interesting question. And it's funny how much time I've spent trying not to think of that question over the last few years, right? Like, I think one of the hardest things as an entrepreneur is staying focused. And it's so easy to jump off on new ideas and go down these rabbit holes. So I've tried for years not to think about that. But now in this current, day, I'm starting to think, I'm starting to welcome that thought process. And so I don't have a perfect answer for you. I know that I love technology. It's going to be in some sort of tech-enabled business, obviously. I love subscriptions. I just love things that simplify people's lives. And then the question is, well, the way I'll find that next thing will be probably the same way I found Videoblocks is what's a problem I encounter on a daily basis that I could solve for myself and for, a bunch of other people and make $1 at the same time.
That's interesting. I mean, that's the exact same question that has inspired the two companies that I've started over the last 10 years. It's the exact same thing. What is my biggest personal problem?
Yep.
And is there a solution? Well, no, not really. Or, if there is one, it's not acceptable or it could be improved. And that's been it. So that's typically the inspiration for most companies these days.
Which I think is a great way to go about it, by the way, because I think the alternative that unfortunately I see take place are people sit down and try to solve for making money as the dependent variable. And that is usually not as effective because your heart's not really in it. And it's going to take a lot of work to get to a successful business. So if you instead solve for dependent variable of, relieving some pain point, and then the byproduct of that is make money, it works a lot better.
Yeah, absolutely. Totally agreed. So if you could put your marketing hat on real quick, I'd love to talk about marketing strategy, pricing strategy, offer strategy. We're on the videoblocks.com homepage right now. And from what I know, the business has primarily been built off an unlimited usage subscription for around $79 a month. And right now you guys have this crazy offer up there for 1 year of unlimited downloads for $149, which is an 86% discount. And I'm wondering how in the world you can build a business off of a, $150 purchase unless there's some other kind of customer, offer, after that or beyond that. And I would just love to get your thoughts on it.
Yeah. So when it comes to marketing and pricing and, the whole mix of things, the short answer is we've tested into every single element of these things, right? So the unlimited plan, the fact that we allow people to have unlimited downloads, that was a test. The free trial was a test. The number of downloads you could download a day during a free trial was a test. Pricing, we've been doing price testing now for 4 years, and it was, monthly versus annually versus semi-annually, various discounts for longer terms versus shorter terms. And then ultimately the price point itself, right? Like why $149 a year instead of $249 or $89? Well, the answer is we tested it all. And I think that's the biggest lesson for listeners is you should, no matter what business you're in, always test, right? You can test in any business, and you can use a tool like Optimizely that's very inexpensive and simple to use to run A/B tests that take part of your traffic, give them one experience, take another part and give them another experience. And the reality is if you actually go to our website in 3 different browsers on 3 different computers, you're going to have probably as many different experiences. We test buttons, calls to action, color schemes, offers, pricing. Everything is a test on our website.
And you're using Optimizely for those.
We kind of grew. We now have so much traffic and so many tests that we built our own testing platform. But we do actually use Optimizely on landing pages for the marketing team, because what was nice is we could say, hey, marketing team, we're throw the JavaScript on these pages, then you guys can have autonomy over running your own tests. So different teams have their own Optimizely testing units, but broadly over the whole site, we run our own testing platform that we built. And we have these weekly testing meetings where we sit down, and we've got tests planned out now for the next year. And we've got tests that are percolating for the last 3 years. And that's just kind of cool, is you've got data from 3 years ago that's still kind of building and changing. And, one day you wake up and go, holy moly, that $149 a year test we ran years ago, we've now realized that 3 years later, those customers are the most engaged. They have the highest net promoter scores and ultimately the highest retention. And that's kind of what happened, right? That's exactly how we came to this number. It was the people who sign up for annual plans tend to be our best customers, better than free trial users, better than, lower price or higher price point users. And they stick around for years. And so then, again, we mentioned this earlier, but the goal is always keep the price as low as possible so that the most number of people, what I call the mass creative class, can afford your product and then sell in bulk. And so we now have 130 or 140, we're probably up to 140,000 paying customers. And so even though $149 at first blush is not a ton, when you multiply it by 140,000, they're paying that every year and staying around for years, it starts to become a pretty big number, which is perfect. because I think the best way to make a lot of money is by charging as little as possible, so your customers save a fortune and you do all right in the process.
Very good. And as far as the split testing goes, do you have any rules that you could share when it comes to that, when it comes to your methodology? Meaning, do you use A/B split testing only? Do you use multivariate? How long do you typically run a test? Is there a certain number of actions that you tell your team to acquire before you make a decision?
Yeah, so I have picked up some tips over the years. One, there are some nice tools out there that are free that can help you figure out how many iterations or how much traffic or how many actions you need to achieve statistical significance. And you can just, you could probably do an internet search for, statistical significance calculators, and you'll find them. But what I found, the first thing I learned was don't jump the gun. So when you first launch an A/B test or an ABCD test, whatever, at first there's going to be one clear winner that's smoking the other winners, and you're like, holy moly, this is so obvious, and you shut it off too early. And what actually would happen if you let it run its course is things start to even out, and the volatility drops and becomes much more smooth as you have more data points. And so my rule of thumb is run a test for a month, at least a month, right? Because even though we've had tests show statistical significance in a week or 2 weeks, it's funny how running for a full month can change things, because there might have been some seasonality to those results. Maybe 1 week was a huge Memorial Day sale, so a ton of people already knew that you were running a sale, and so they took an action that was actually a test, and gives you a bit of a skew. So if you run it for a month or longer, right, for really important tests, we've run it even longer, you kind of help get away from any sort of seasonality that might be affecting the results. As for multivariate, I think multivariate's very cool, and I used to run a lot of multivariate tests. It seems so badass and mathematical, but you need so much data to make a multivariate test work that a lot of times it's easier to simply do an A/B test.
Yeah, agreed. Agreed. Yeah, I remember multivariate was the big thing 10 years ago with Google AdWords. And like you said, it takes so much traffic that by the time you've acquired that much, you could have just done an A/B, anyway, 5 times over. So, very cool. On keeping on the tech theme here, this is a pitfall that I've unfortunately run into a couple of times during my career, which is starting out with a technology platform that is built for your 5 to 10 year vision of where you see the company going. And so do you go ahead and start as soon as you can with that level of tech infrastructure, which is overkill at the time? Or do you start smaller and leaner, but at some point there's going to have to be a switch, which typically has a huge switching cost. So did you guys go through that process over the last 10 years?
Yeah, we sure did. So the way I approached it, and the way I'd still probably approach it, when we were launching Videoblocks.com and testing this whole concept of a subscription-based approach to stock video, it really was a test. There were no companies doing it, so we had no idea if it was going to connect with the market or not. We thought it was, or it was an educated guess, but I wasn't willing to invest a ton of money in building the forward-looking infrastructure on a test. So instead, we built a very minimum viable product. And I remember this. I used elance.com. I found a firm in India to build the bones of a subscription-based website that had video clips, and paid only a couple $1,000s to build the first iteration. Found a local developer who I then hired and put the polish on it, fixed it up, got it from 80% to like 90%. And then we launched to our existing customers for Footage Firm to see if there was a there. And once there was a there, and we saw it was working, then we tore down the site and rebuilt it. Now, to your point, even that first teardown rebuild was done economically. Like, we did not build it for the business that it is today. And so 3 years ago or 4 years ago, we actually realized that we had accumulated, the industry term for it is technical debt. And we had a bunch of technical debt that we had to basically pay the piper for in order to rebuild the website to handle much more traffic, because the problems we were running into, the database was slow, the database wasn't distributed, the website wasn't distributed. We were actually on independent boxes, like on dedicated servers. It wasn't very scalable. So we had to rebuild on a fully distributed platform, and that was very expensive and time consuming. And now the site's great, and now we can handle almost anything, but we had to pay the piper at a certain point. But now the question is, would I go back and do it any differently? And the answer is no, I wouldn't, because it would have been a shame to invest a fortune in building the perfect product that nobody wanted.
And do you guys currently use some services that you love? Are you on Salesforce? Do you use Magento? Is it proprietary? Did you build it from scratch?
No, yeah. It's all proprietary at this point. I used to use Magento, 7 or 8 years ago with Footage Firm. That was my shopping cart. Terrible database problems. So that was frustrating, but it worked for what I needed at the time. No, I think, today we use a few different tools effectively. One is AHA, AHA.io for project management. We obviously use Slack as a communication tool. We use customer.io for triggered emails, but not just time-based. They're actually event-based triggered emails, which is very powerful. And it's surprisingly inexpensive service. But you can then have, say a member logs on and does something, like goes and downloads from a certain category. That event on that specific member can then trigger an email in real time telling them to do something else. And so that's been pretty cool. So we do a lot of emailing at Videoblocks, and most of it's pretty sophisticated. But the tools like MailChimp and then Customer.io, it's got you covered.
Interesting. So is that the pairing that you use? Basically, MailChimp paired with Customer.io?
We do. That's kind of like, we send. I think we've got millions of users, so we send 20, 30 million emails a month. Mm-hmm. So we use those two for some basic stuff, and then we have a number of larger ESPs we use for handling the bulk of the mailing. But man, if I was starting a business right now, I'd go straight to MailChimp and I go straight to Customer.io because that's everything you need. Once you get into like the bigger numbers, then you can find other companies that are less expensive, but they're perfect for starting.
Yeah, agreed. I've gone through that whole evolution of, using ExactTarget and again, these Fortune 500 level, email service providers. And, last year just went with MailChimp, and it's just so easy. Like, it's just so simple and it works. And I tested the inbox delivery rates and it was 100% inbox. I'm like, okay, that's all you can really ask for.
That's it.
Yeah, absolutely. Very cool. Well, this has been an unbelievably, enlightening conversation. Very, very educational. We've got a couple of minutes left. What would you like to share? Maybe some words of wisdom, with the audience here before we leave. And it can be about business. It can be about life, personally, health, health related, wealth related, relationship related. What would you like to leave everyone with?
Well, first of all, great conversation. Thank you. You're a natural leading great conversation, so I appreciate you having me on. I think that, the only thing I would do differently in my business life and evolution over the last decade is I should have listened to myself earlier on when I was approaching burnout. And instead of trying to push through it, thinking I could just grind, I should have backed off the gas a bit. And not to say that I have to back off the growth of the company, but just change so that, like, for me personally, going in and sitting at a computer terminal, 12 hours a day just wasn't working for me. And I kept doing it anyway. And that was not good. So I think you got to listen to yourself. And if your body or mind is telling you to get outside and go hiking or buy an RV and go traveling, don't feel guilty about it. That was the reason I didn't do it earlier, was it was like a feeling of guilt. Like, I should be in the office crushing, not out enjoying myself. I should be enjoying life. I should be working. And that's stupid. I think I've learned that you can both crush work and enjoy life at the same time. And balance is very important. And that then applies to everything: relationships, family, work. You can kind of have your cake and eat it too.
Yeah, I like that. I like that idea. And the first person who pops into my head is Gary Vaynerchuk.
Yeah, right. Yeah, exactly. Exactly right. Look, even Elon Musk, gets out and has a great time. I mean, the guy goes out, hits Burning Man, he parties, right? Like he's doing so much. It's hard to even like put my mind around, and yet he's still out having a good time. So I think you have to do that. If you don't allow yourself to have a pressure release valve, you're going to blow up.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, Joel, this has been unbelievably educational. I've really, really enjoyed this talk today, and thank you so much. Guys, make sure you go check out videoblocks.com. And I know so many of you are always creating content, whether it's for your YouTube channel or Instagram or whatever it may be, your video sales letters. This could be an absolutely amazing resource that can up the quality of everything that you're doing for, frankly, almost for free. It's so inexpensive. So he's put together quite an unbelievably valuable service. So go check that out. And the book just decided to fall off my desk there. And Joel, thank you so much for being here. I really do appreciate this. I'm looking forward to connecting with you at F1, and we'll hopefully see you on a highway at some point here soon.
Oh, thanks, Mike. Really appreciate it.
Thank you. Thank you guys so much, and we'll see you next week.